2023 had plenty of fantastic gaming experiences. Or it had like 5 games that were pretty good, depending on your perspective. It was one or the other. But either way you look at it, like every other year, there are a bunch of great games that fall through the cracks. On this list, we've collected some of 2023's incredible games that, for one reason or another, nobody bought. How do we know nobody bought them? Well, publishers and developers tend to keep their cards close to their chest on sales figures unless said sales figures are impressive. That said, we can interpret various factors like slim player bases, criminal levels of underratedness, which might be a word I just made up, and general obscurity to safely assume these ones didn't sell like hotcakes. If you have heard of them, good on you for stepping outside the box, and if you haven't, hopefully we can put some cool games on your radar. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 10 best 2023 video games nobody bought. Number 10, Cassette Beasts. Dropping just a day before another game on our list and 2 days before Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which is an unenviable release window, even given a year this stacked, Cassette Beasts is a monster collectathon role-playing game by Bitten Studio and Raw Fury. You'll tame critters that you can then face off against each other in turn-based battles that all happen within a cassette-type aesthetic. While you might have passed on this one simply because it seems like a Pokemon clone, it's much more than that. Though the game's inspiration is clear, it goes a step further in several capacities. The first is that it isn't shackled by needing to appeal to a younger target market. Beyond that, the game flies above the typical genre trappings with a stellar soundtrack, brightly colored pixel art visuals, and a compelling fusion system. If you're feeling tempted and like the idea of the gameplay format, but you're not entirely sure if you want to give it a shot, it's worth noting this one sits at $20 US, so it's kind of a steal. In a year stacked with heavy narratives and inundating gameplay systems, Cassette Beasts is a nostalgia-laden breath of fresh air with a genuinely engaging story, rewarding exploration, and oodles of charm. Number 9, Space Wreck. Switching out old-school creature battling for old-school CRPGs, Space Wreck is a fascinating little game that rewards you for leveling into different areas of your skill set in order to fuel up an abandoned space station. Said station is where you have experienced the titular space wreck, and much like an old classic RPG like the original Fallout games, Space Wreck is not especially forgiving. The challenge comes by way of your character build, by and large, as it should in a game where your stat allocation is the be-all and end-all. If you decide not to put any points into charisma, for example, you can't even speak to other characters since you're basically too socially anxious. As a result, there are plenty of different approaches to the hurdles you run into in the game, and there are things like optional combat and genuinely impactful decision-making. Space Wreck is a fun, fleshed-out RPG in a tiny little package, and while it's hard to draw similarities to a game like The Outer Worlds due to the former's retro visuals, both offer something we almost never see: a compact RPG that houses everything you want from the genre in a game you can knock out in around 10 hours. Number 8, A Space for the Unbound. Released in that weird liminal space we call January, where the industry's pretty quiet, we're trying to catch up on last year's releases and mourning the holiday period, this particular game offers up something really unique. Sporting an overwhelmingly positive average of reviews on Steam, this is a gorgeous adventure that will take you about 10 hours or so. A Space for the Unbound steps outside the bounds, of your typical video game narrative, casting the spotlight on Atma and Raya, a couple of high school students that discover they have supernatural abilities after reading a curious book. Atma can delve into the minds of others to help them with their issues, while Raya can levitate and alter reality. Thematically, the game deals with the gamut of human emotion, right from depression and anxiety to the glimmer of hope beneath it all. The game is also set in 1990s Indonesia with vibrant pixel art visuals, which sets an interesting and rarely explored stage for a story. If you often find yourself on the hunt for a great new narrative in a medium that excels in delivering just that, this could well be your cup of tea. Number 7, This Bed We Made. A step away from your classic walking simulator-esque adventure game, This Bed We Made is set in a hotel in the 1950s. From first-time developer and publisher Low Birth Games, the mystery This Bed We Made was released on PC as well as current and last generation consoles on November 1st. Stepping into the fashionable shoes of a maid, you'll be snooping around hotel rooms and uncovering all sorts of unsettling, titillating, and even life-altering secrets as you do so. What you find, how you find it, what you choose to share, and with who is incredibly important. The hotel room investigations make you feel delightfully sneaky, and the game features some impressive voice acting. While it well and truly passed under the radar for most players, this compelling noir adventure absolutely deserves to be played. And you can hook up with people, so that's cool. If you're on the fence, the developers have released a free demo on Steam, which is well worth checking out. And as with many of the excellent indies appearing on this list, this is a fun and engaging little game that doesn't overstay its welcome, but excels from start to finish. Number 6, Season: A Letter to the Future. Another game that slid into the January release window just before the month was out was Season: A Letter to the Future. If you're a fan of games that feel like nothing you've ever seen before, this exploration game has you making the most of the last days of Earth's existence. You can take pictures, draw, and record audio, and look, I know for some people this game might sound a little too chill, but just consider it a palate cleanser between Alan Wake 2 and the 200 hours you're gonna spend in Baldur's Gate 3. Season is deeply impactful and has plenty to say for those willing to dive into its lush, gorgeous game world. If you've been holding out for a game that'll make you feel something, Season and its layered characters and intriguing narrative serve up a buffet of heartstring-pulling moments. This is yet another delightful slice-of-life game that cropped up in a year full of complex and lengthy outings. Number 5, Bramble the Mountain King. Bramble the Mountain King is a short but sweet horror romp that is reminiscent of Little Nightmares. Created by Swedish studio Dim Frost Studios, the third-person action-adventure arrived just before The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom toward the end of April. That tricky release window aside, Bramble offers up a compelling, albeit deeply disturbing adventure where you play as a young boy trying to rescue your sister. The game is as grotesque as it is gorgeous. The linear nature of Bramble forces you to push ahead in its side-scrolling environments Limbo style, but what separates the two is the story told far more explicitly, and has much to say about Nordic mythology. Well, that and monsters from Norse mythology trying to remove your tiny limbs from your tiny body. The game features clever environmental puzzles, genuinely frightening encounters, and boss fights that cleverly thread the needle of being challenging without being overwhelmingly difficult. The attention to detail in Bramble is an absolute treat, and it's definitely enough to steel yourself to a little fear so you can explore its gorgeously realized environments. A bundle of classic horror themes embedded in mythology and a fascinating story featuring character development, Bramble is a hidden gem you shouldn't miss out on. Number 4, Lusid. Kicking back with a game that clearly harkens back to very old-school RPGs, Lusid offers a compelling adventure that is as interesting to explore as its name is hard to pronounce. The fantasy RPG has you dungeon crawling and exploring its sprawling game world, utilizing a range of spells and weapons. The game is inspired by early FromSoft games Shadow Tower and Kingsfield, and it won't take you long once you delve into its cavernous and claustrophobic dungeon environments to see why. The presentation brings you right back to the best of what classic RPGs had to offer, and exploration is rewarded thoroughly through some particularly well-hidden secrets. If you, like me, are getting old and appreciate developers who like to keep old-school gaming formats alive in our modern gaming scape, then you'll really appreciate this one. Number 3, The Last Faith. If you're after a little more action, 2023 had you sorted with a pile of quality Metroidvania games, one of these being The Last Faith. Arriving in the middle of November, this gothic action game feeds you an arsenal with which to decimate everything it has to throw at you. And it has a lot to throw at you. The game blends its Metroidvania gameplay style with that of a Souls-like to great effect. The visuals and sound design are impressively striking, and the game wears its Castlevania inspiration proudly on its sleeve, managing to do the classic justice and elevate the genre to the modern day. Due to the breadth of its weapons, there's plenty of replay value here, meaning you can easily get a couple dozen hours out of this one. While players have delivered feedback to the devs asking for quality of life adjustments, particularly since the game spawned out of a successful Kickstarter, the consensus is that The Last Faith is doing far more right than it's doing wrong. The levels are gorgeous, the game is riddled with side activities and quests to keep you busy, and the voice acting is, look, it's a little cheesy, but in a way that totally works. Yet another game that was largely passed on by most major gaming outlets. You'd be forgiven for sleeping on this one. But now I've told you about it, you should, wake up and play it or something. Nailed it. Number 2, Paso Elsewhere. It's unlikely you would have reached for third-person shooter El Paso Elsewhere on its release date, even if you did know about it, since it hit shelves the very same day as Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty. If you bucked the trend though and gave this neo-noir supernatural shooter a whirl, you'd be in for a treat. It's you up against all manner of beasties from werewolves to fallen angels, all with the intent of taking out the big bad Dracula, who also happens to be your ex. It seems like a tall order, but you've got Molotovs, oodles of ammo, and slow-mo dives on your side. The visuals are wonderfully vibrant, the environment's delightfully unique, the music is engrossing, and the performances are impressive. As an homage to Max Payne, it does unfortunately emulate that game in its slightly awkward gameplay, but luckily it also emulates everything that made Max Payne great as well. Number 1. Void Stranger. Void Stranger is a Sokoban-style puzzle game, and if you don't know what that is, because I didn't, it's that kind of puzzle where you push the boxes around the room. It has a gorgeous black and white art style, lovely music that accompanies the hypnotically charming story cutscenes, as well as your tense puzzling. It's easy to dismiss this one as a basic Sokoban puzzler without much substance, but that couldn't be further from the case. Void Stranger presses boundaries in a really interesting way, but absolutely asks you to actually stick with it if you want to experience the full emotional gut punch of its impact. Developed and published by the studio System Erasure, this is yet another game on this list waving the flag for indie games and proving that just because a bunch of people didn't buy a title doesn't mean you shouldn't.